Welcome back. Here's where you left off.
Do book series become very repetitive? I say it is. But my friend Derek will say no. I have a feeling he'll say no.
You don't know. You don't know.
I do know. I do know enough that sometimes a book series can be fantastic. It can be 30 books long. It can be so good that they made a TV show and HBO paid the writers so much money, and because the series is so good. And some series are so bad that you'd be like, after the first book, I can't continue this anymore because I want to poke my eyes. So it's one of those questions that old people always ask: is a book series good enough to become an amazing series, or it could be so repetitive that you just want to kill yourself when you read it? I think that's the question of today's episode. And Derek, do you like my intro on this one, or is it too much?
It's good. It's good. So, I mean, I tend to, I think it's a personality thing between the two of us, because generally, once I get invested in a series, I tend to say, okay, I'm going to stay with it. I'm going to gut through it, even if some of the books are a little less interesting than others. I just say, okay, it'll be fine. But then on the other hand, it gets kind of bad at sometimes. So I think it really depends on the series. And so for you to say that, I'm going to agree. I do like book series because it allows you to flesh out a world. It allows you to give a character a lot of breadth and value. And one of the first examples I'm going to give is the Frontlines series. That book series was excellent. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's actually an offshoot series happening now with the writer. And that was a great series because he built on each subsequent book. In other words, the first book laid the groundwork. The next book was its sort of self-contained story, but it did build on the next. Now, when you got to the end of the book series, I personally wanted to have a little bit more, because where he left it off was more to me of a cliffhanger than a satisfying resolution to the book series. And I think that's where we both start to talk about what is a satisfactory end to the series. And a long book series, does it drag on? Are you just writing the books to write the books? Is there a purpose to it, or are you just making it up as you go? What do you think, Leonard?
For me, it's like, you actually posed a very good question here. Is the series itself has meaning? Like, let's say if you decide to have a series of 10 books, for example, and each book has a purpose and to push along the story, right? If you have that, then yes, go for it. But if you have a series that I hate to say this, but if money gets involved in the series, hey, we need to keep this going because we're making a lot of money having this series going. Now we're in the line of becoming very repetitive. There's a series that you really, really liked. I liked it at the beginning, but it became to the point it became so repetitive I just couldn't stand it anymore. It's Helldiver. Helldiver, I actually introduced you to Helldiver, and it was a great series. It was a great series until it reached book 5 or 6. Then it becomes so repetitive that I couldn't stand reading it anymore. I actually stopped reading it, and you continued reading it, right? So I think it's...
And the interesting thing is that that is sort of a good argument that you make about it, because I can understand, for that specific series, I can understand your argument where it is repetitive in the sense of what happens in the plot lines. He does move it forwards a little bit, but not... It's as if, the writer said, hey, I have something here. I'm going to continue to write these books, but then he had to find other plot lines as he's gone on. It wasn't thought out as a full-fledged book series, whereas I felt like the Frontline books was a little more sketched out for the increase in resolution to the plot lines. And I know that you didn't read fully through that series either. It seems that I go through the series more than you do, where I stick with it because I get invested. As an example, a good example of one where I felt that was a little lacking was Earthrise. Earthrise, there are, I think, 15 books and three offshoot book series of that series. And I haven't even read the full 15 books of the original series because they're kind of a grind to get through. And I know you, and you would hate it. You would absolutely hate it because by book 13, the writer actually goes back to sort of the baddies in the first book. So he's gone sort of full circle where he has to kind of go back to the beginning baddies to discuss it and to be able to create some more tension in the book series, right? And by this point in book 13 or so, I feel as if he's just writing to make money. And have you found the book series where you find that's the case?
Yeah, Helldiver is one of them. Well, that's a very extreme. My opinion regarding that series is very extreme, right? So some people think that the book is very good. Some people think that the book sucks. Some people think that it's just very, very repetitive. For me, it's repetitive, right? And I think having a series that is considered meaningful and actually brings storyline is very far. It's a very handful can actually do that, right? Because I think you made a good point. Well, we're just having a simple discussion that if you're a writer, if you know how the book, the series, or the whole world ends, right? Now you have a goal. It will take you 3 books to like 10 books to 15 books to finish that off, but at least you have an end goal at the end. It's like at the end of this book series, I am done. This book is done, right? But if you have a series that is so popular and making so much money for the publisher and the writer, now we're in a point of a line. We're starting a line. It's like, is this series become so repetitive that the audience will just pay to get this book because they're financially and emotionally committed to the series, so they're willing to finish it off, right? But if you're a reader like me, I know when to say this sucks. It feels like I'm literally reading book 1 again. And now we're in the line. Now the question you have to ask yourself is this series done, or is this just a money maker thing? I know I'm harping. Sorry, I'm harping on it.
I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you here. Okay, let's discuss 2 different book series. Okay, one is The Expanse, and the other one is The Dresden Files. And one of these I introduced you to, which is The Expanse, and you introduced me to The Dresden Files.
Yes.
And The Expanse is a very good book series, which has sort of a nice arc to it. The characters are well developed. If people can relate to this in a bit because the TV series is there, so they haven't read the book specifically. The general gist, you get it out of the TV series. However, in the books, it is a little bit different, but we're not going to go into that. My point is that the development of the series was a progressive thing. And when we think about the Dresden Files, which you introduced, I started to read that with a lot of, I guess, hope. And it's very unusual for me just to drop the series. But what happened is I got into the second book and I found like there was what the writer was doing wasn't innovative. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of this, okay? To keep my attention, you have to be innovative in the sense of bringing me something I haven't seen before. The Expanse did that. It brought us a realistic world of space battle and aliens and so forth that was sort of realistic in our near future. That was great. Okay, great, wonderful. There was another book series called Bobiverse, which is also sort of in the near future, which also has themes of, what makes humanity, what makes you as a soul, does your soul exist after you die, and things to that effect. And the writer during the book series in that one explores that in most of the books, and generally speaking, he's coming up with some more of that. However, with the Dresden Files, what you have is the writer, and I mean, I'm harping on the book here just because of making my point about the content, not necessarily quality of the writer. The content of the book is tropic. So when you read the Dresden Files, it has this nice tint to it of, I would make an argument of a 1940s novel. That's the way it feels to me, like somebody in a 1940s novel, like a detective in a 1940s novel, which is kind of cool. But the problem is that when we get into the nitty gritties of him being a magical person and all of this, it's great and wonderful. But then the writer leans into every trope there is: gargoyles, werewolves, fairies, whatever. And there's nothing in that really is engaging from a plot point to say, what is new here that's going to be? I know what a werewolf is. I know what a fairy is. I know what a... So just because you have them fighting each other isn't necessarily making them interesting and different enough for me to say, what about that is unique? What do you think about that contrast there?
I do agree with you, and I do agree with you. It's if you okay. Let me phrase this again. I do agree with you with that statement that if you have a book that introduces characters that help develop the storyline, I have no problems with that. It makes a lot of sense. But if you have a character that you're introducing that just to help create more tension for no apparent reason, then I have a problem with that. The reason why is the same. It's one of those things. Why is the writer introduce something that they don't need to, right? Give
me an example here. Give me an example here. What's a good example for you?
Star Wars, Jar Jar Binks. That character.
We're talking about books here, not movies.
I know, but we're talking about something similar now. Right? We're talking about. Okay, here's a good example. Helldivers. It's every time the beginning of the book series itself is a character. It's a character that's been developed as a main character. He went through a lot of things throughout the whole. I think the first 4 or 5 books, right? And then, to be honest with you, when he captured the oil rig as an oil rig, that it's a town, for example, it's a town. And he conquered it, and everyone's peaceful. I thought that whole thing ended that way, but it keeps going. So when he started introducing more characters to expand the world, that it becomes that every time a book starts or a new book ended, he or the group itself killed that new character because the character's a bad guy. There's a new character comes in that's like, I'm going to take over because I'm going to do a revenge, for example. It becomes very, you can actually predict it. You can literally predict the book itself. It's like, at the end of this book, someone's going to die, they're going to introduce another person, then it keeps going. So
I mean, I'm going to give you another example. Going back to the Earthrise series, which I don't think you've read.
No.
Basically, my objection, I've said this before in other reviews. I've said that my problem with the Earthrise series is that you have a couple people, the main characters, and then the way the writer deals with tension in a book is to send 100,000 ships out and only the main characters survive. And every time they do this, you know that only the 3 main characters are going to survive. So there's never any tension. There's never any, the main character might die, or there might be a problem, or one of his buddies might get it. No, they don't get it, right? And so to me, that's not engaging writing in the way it is. With another example, which we always love, and we speak about Expeditionary Force, where we say there are a number of sub-characters that you are brought over in a number of books, and when they are killed off, you feel it because the death of that character is not something that the writer takes lightly. And when they kill that main character off, it's either a shock value or it's emotionally impactful. Whereas if you just have a bunch of characters that are there to be killed off for the sake of being killed off, if you know they go in with a squad, that the squad is going to die and the main character is going to come out, how do you feel about that from an emotional standpoint of reading the book series when you know that's how the writer approaches tension in the book? See my point?
Yeah, I see your point. But the question I have to ask is like, okay, how about this? Here's a question that I'm going to ask you, and you be honest with me in this one. Is Expeditionary Force repetitive?
It depends on the perspective you take. People could certainly view it as repetitive. It is definitely a possibility that they could. I don't look at it that way for different reasons than other people, but if somebody made that argument to me, I could not disagree with them. The reason is that most of the books relate around missions. In other words, there's a mission, you go off, you complete the mission, and you come back, right? And so that in that sense, it is repetitive. I make the argument that it's a lot different than that in the way the writer handles it, but I can understand the argument. I disagree with it, but you take it that way. When we look at something like, let's take a different example here. With Helldivers, there's a group of characters that goes through. In other book series, and I'll give you a couple examples. One is Planetside. Planetside's a good example where you have a singular main character that is through multiple books, and that character's interactions, storylines are different in every book. So there's the main character, he has an adventure here, he has an adventure there, an adventure there, an adventure there. Each individual adventure is its own self-contained story, and he is the only constant through the multiple books. So if you don't like the main character, then you're just not going to like the book series. And that's one way a writer creates new stories going through. It's the same thing with Bobiverse. That's the same thing. One main character that's through all books, but each book is a sort of individual world building. Does that sort of writing where... Another example is Chris Hadfield's writing. Like he has the character of Kaz in his writings where he's in multiple books, but those books are self-contained in sort of Cold War dramatizations. Do you see my point with these character arcing? Do you like that sort of thing?
If it's a standalone, for example, yes. The short answer, yes, I do like that. I do like the example you used for Chris Hadfield. He has Kaz, the main character that continues to different series of the different books of the series itself, right? The series itself is called, it's the main character throughout the whole thing is Kaz. The same thing for the James Bond series. You have James Bond as the main character that keeps going forward to the next book. But each book, as you said, it's a different storyline. It's a different art. It's a different baddies, different arc, different everything. So if you can't move into the next one, the only thing that's common is, for example, in Kaz, it's in a Cold War era, right? That's the overall world. And for the James Bond, they have this overall, it's Cold War as well too. But there's a James Bond. And there's another, and the baddies itself, the organization for the baddies, right? So you have that thing keeps moving along, but it feels like it's not repetitive because each book is something different, right? But if you look at Expeditionary Force or Helldivers or any long series, even the Terminal List, you have this thing that it feels like you're just continuing it, right? If you're having something if you have the storyline continue itself to the next book, that's fine. I have no problems with that. I definitely love that kind of world because the world becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But the issue I have is the world that the writer is building is just being expanded because of money? Or or if the writer is like, hey, I want to expand this because I want to continue, right? So now there's a fine line of like, is this being repetitive?
There's a fine line, and I agree. Like, for example, the concept, I'm going to give another example. So Frontlines, I gave the example of a building. So we have a couple characters, they go through. We sort of know necessarily that they're going to live, but the plot line improves and the storyline expands, the world expands. I would make the argument the same thing happens in the Harry Potter books, that world expands, it gets bigger, they expand out the characters. So you're building it up. You're not, as you would say in Helldivers, recycling the same story plot, just putting a different person in that place. I guess that's your argument, right?
Yeah, that's my argument. You actually made another good point too. Harry Potter series. The original Harry Potter series is good. I'd read it. It took me 2 years to read it, but I've read it. Okay, but if you look at the spinoff like Dumbledore, those series. The other one is the oh man, I can't remember the other series now. The other spinoff that felt it was repetitive. it felt that it was just, hey, we can maximize our revenue in this one. That's why, to be honest with you, I only watched the first two movies in each spinoff, or the first movie of the spinoff. After that, I stopped watching because I can literally predict exactly what's going to happen next. So as a reader, if you ending up reading a book series and you feel like you can actually predict what's going to happen next, the series become officially very repetitive. Right? But if you're a reader, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for the next one because I want all this to be answered, or I want at least partial of the questions I want answered. That's still good. That's perfect. That's where your audience wants to be. That's where a writer should say, I got the audience by literally hanging, waiting for me to drop the new one for the next bombshell. Right? That's a great series. But if the audience says, I can predict exactly what's going to happen in the next book, to the next book, to the next book, then you are in a repetitive world and your value as a series plummeted.
So then what I'm saying here is that a series that has compelling characters, that expands the world without recycling the storyline, is a better series. So when you asked me the question earlier, is Expeditionary Force repetitive? There are aspects of that series that are repetitive. However, the series is always expanded as the books go on. It's just the writer, he likes to give a lot of what we'll call filler in the middle of it. It's just his process to do that. And that's what I think people would find repetitive about it. I personally like it, but I could see people's arguments for it. Another good example is the Silo books. Those are great examples of world building that's both interconnected but separated. And since people are watching the series and it hasn't concluded yet, we're not going to discuss any spoilers here about it. But essentially, there are 3 books in the series. The first book is sort of the beginning of the Silo. The second book is the prequel of that book series, which I have said to you before, that is really compelling, which I think they could do a whole series on their own, which they're not going to, which I thought was really sad. And then the third book, which interconnects the first 2 books together. So that writing interconnectivity is very compelling if it's done right. And that is also a great advantage of a book series. A book series doesn't have to be 15 books long. Like, it could be 2 books, The Chris Hadfield books are just 2 books right now. He's having a third one come out very shortly that is going to have the same main character, but they're self-contained storylines. When we have interconnected storylines, that's a lot more for the writer to keep track of and do in, for example, the Silo series, which I found very interesting, especially how they can put prequel stuff, or how did it come about? The big question people have is, why is the Silo there? And the second book sort of answers that. And the curious thing about the writer is they gave you in the second book all those answers, and then they came back in the third book and wrapped it all up in a bow. And that was sort of what I thought to be a interesting writing choice, because you could have left that to the end. That you could have switched the second and third books together and it would have been still just fine, right? Give the answers at the end. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here.
Okay, here's another question for you, though. Okay, do you prefer a shorter series or a longer series that has potential to become repetitive?
I would always say that I would prefer a shorter series that is interconnected with compelling characters than a longer series that is not. I think that, as an example, I keep on coming back to Frontlines, that series was ended because the writer, I think he became tired of writing the series, even though I think there was a lot that he could still continue to explore in the world. And I think that maybe that's the reason he went to do a separate book series of it. I don't know if he got tired of that plot line, or maybe he felt like the plot line was at its end. I don't know. But it's a great example of a guy that clearly has a world he can build out more. The problem is when you get a series like Earthrise, and yes, I'm kind of crashing on Earthrise a little bit here. When you have Earthrise, when you read the books, especially in series, you see that the writer is coming up with a new villain every book. Like, what's the new villain? What's the new person that I have to fight the main characters against? And there's not a plan there. There's just I've got to figure out what the new villain is. And that is what makes it repetitive, not the fact that the characters aren't good or not the fact that the storyline isn't interesting. But at the end, when you're like, okay, we have a new baddie we have to go into defeat. Okay, that's fine. But just because they're a little different than the last bad guy in the last book doesn't mean it's a compelling book anymore. There's not a development. It's just a repetitive of the storyline that goes over and over and over again. And all you get are characters that are more traumatized, I'll say, like from defeating the baddies over and over again, right?
Yeah. I think the question we have originally, do long book series become repetitive? And then our both answers are yes, it can be. In the same time, it can be exciting. Yeah. In the same time, it can be. Yeah, it can be exciting. It could be boring as hell, but at the end of the day, the satisfaction at the end is just fantastic.
Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and help others find this podcast by sharing a review. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting apps. Join us again right here where your bookmark left off.